This is so messed up, so disturbing, that it frankly sounds like a dark satire in a very edgy comedy. Well, alas, it is all too real. Mordecai Braffman is a 27-year-old plumber from Miami in Florida, the Sunshine State. He's Jewish. On Saturday night, using a semi-automatic handgun, he fired 17 bullets at two men who were in a car. His motive? Well, when he was caught, he told the police that he had seen two Palestinians and shot and killed them. Here is yet another grim example of where the normalization of anti-Palestinian hatred leads. This time, though, there was a twist. The two victims were not Palestinian at all. They were, in fact, Israeli tourists, Ari Rabi and his son, Yaron Rabi. They'd only just arrived on their Florida holidays, probably looking forward to temperatures in the late 20s. As it happened, they were not killed. Indeed, they were only lightly injured, but they had concluded that they had been attacked by an Arab assailant. And so the Sun posted the following in the aftermath on social media. My father and I went through an attempted murder with an anti-Semitic background. They tried to murder us in the heart of Miami, but God is with us, so it didn't work out for him. I want to say thank you to everyone for the support and that we don't take it for granted. Am Israel High, before the message ended with death to Arabs. So let's just get this straight. In a story where this man shoots two Israelis, the overriding feeling in the hearts of both perpetrator and victims is hatred of Arabs. Interestingly, when the victims then appeared on the Israeli television channel, Channel 13, they took a rather different tack from their post.
וכשגיליתם שזה יהודי, היורה, ואת הסיבה שהוא ירה...
באותו רגע לא גילינו שזה יהודי, רק אחרי שהיינו במשרדים של ה-FBI,
כן.
אז הבנו שזה בחור יהודי.
ואחרי שגיליתם, מה שהתברר שהוא פשוט טעה בזהות?
אין לי מה להגיד, אני בהלם.
זה לא משנה מה אנחנו, יהודים, רוסים, ערבים, זה לא משנה. אף בן אדם אין לו זכות לקחת חיים של בן אדם אחר, אתה מסכים איתי?
ברור, מה זאת אומרת? איזה שאלה?
So they conclude that interview by saying no human being has the right to take the life of another human being. Do you agree with me? If you don't mind me saying so, this is quite the leap from death to Arabs. It is not unreasonable to presume someone who writes those words as no peacenik and is almost certainly a supporter of Israel's genocidal onslaught in Gaza and its murderous rampage in, say, Lebanon. So it'd be interesting to hear how he squares no human being has the right to take the life of another human being with that. This remains an anti-Palestinian hate crime, by the way. In truth, I'm not entirely aware of how Miami law operates in this area, but in British law, perception and motive matter. For example, there's been multiple examples of British Sikhs being attacked by racists who believe them to be Muslim. This is then treated by British law as an Islamophobic hate crime. In Palestine itself, the genocidal frenzy of the Israeli state has led to the slaughter of Israelis. In December 2023, 3 Israeli hostages who were shirtless, thus clearly not armed, and waving a white flag and shouting in Hebrew were shot dead by the Israeli army. Quite reasonably, the conclusion then was if these 3 Israeli hostages were killed, then what hope for Palestinian civilians? A large number of Israeli hostages are known to have been killed by the Israeli state. We don't actually know how many, but it is certainly significantly a lot more than have been rescued by military means by the Israeli state. Now, in the current so-called ceasefire in Gaza, Israel has reportedly violated the ceasefire 266 times and killed 132 Palestinians. That we still call this a ceasefire is indicative of just how devalued Palestinian life is. By contrast, a single Israeli has been killed in Gaza during the so-called ceasefire that I'm aware of. His name, Jacob Avitan. He was a 39-year-old civilian contractor with Israel's defense ministry. And who shot him dead? The Israeli army, because they thought he was a Palestinian. Now look, this all speaks to the nature of racism. What are known as races are social constructs. Racism is about how people are racialized. As a piece in the Times of Israel noted back in 2016, many of today's Palestinians are descendants of the original Jews. They since converted to Christianity or Islam, or both, Christianity then Islam. An article in Science Journal at the turn of the centuries found that as per their genetics, many Arabs and Jews are closely related. It noted that the Y chromosome in Middle Eastern Arabs was almost indistinguishable from that of Jews. Another, more recent study in 2020 found that most of today's Jewish and Arab-speaking populations share a strong genetic link to the ancient Canaanites. And yet the Palestinian people are widely presented as subhuman Israeli society. That's because this isn't about race. It isn't about religion. It's about dispossession and colonialism. A people were dispossessed from their land, occupied, and ethnically cleansed. Accordingly, they are racialized as inferior in order to justify the fate imposed upon them, much as the European colonizers racialized black Africans in order to justify enslaving them, subjugating them, stealing their lands, thieving their resources, and murdering huge numbers of them. What we do need to talk about is anti-Palestinian racism, which has only accelerated since Israel's genocide began. Mordechai Brafman shooting two Israelis, thinking they're both Arab, and his Israeli victims believing their attacker was Arab and responding with death to Arabs is part of that. Now, there's been endless talk about anti-Semitism and Jewish safety. Well, anti-Semitism is real. It's an evil, and Jewish people in the diaspora have the right to feel safe. The problem, of course, is that real, actual anti-Semitism, an evil which needs to be fought and is rising, has been conflated with any signs of sympathy with the Palestinian people, any signs of solidarity with the Palestinian people, objections to Palestinians being murdered. A particularly shameless example of this was written by Melanie Phillips in the Jewish Chronicle, headlined, "If you support the Palestinian cause in any form, you're facilitating Jew hate." The subheading then singles out preposterously the governments of Canada, the UK, and Australia as some of the worst offenders. This is actually a helpful contribution from Melanie Phillips because it is simply honest about what Israel's cheerleaders have sought to do. And while pro-Israel cheerleaders have sought to portray the left as the real danger when it comes to anti-Semitism, thanks to our solidarity with the Palestinian people, they not only let the far right off the hook when that's where the real danger of anti-Semitism comes from, the overriding danger comes from, they're often allied to that far right. Think Viktor Orban in Hungary, amongst Israel's staunchest allies, which repeatedly uses anti-Semitic tropes against the opposition. Think, of course, Donald Trump, who has made repeated anti-Semitic comments, and Elon Musk, who not only did what many of us would regard as two very clear-cut Nazi salutes and told the far-right German AfD that its country should move beyond its past guilt, but even endorsed the claim that Jewish communities promote hatred against whites. But note how anti-Palestinian racism and anti-Arab racism has simply been airbrushed from the conversation, underlining how Palestinian and Arab life simply doesn't matter. In October 2023, in Illinois, the United States, the 71-year-old landlord, Joseph M. Kazuba, stabbed to death a 6-year-old Palestinian-American boy, Wadia al-Fayoum. This little boy was stabbed 26 times, and his mother, 32-year-old Hanan Shaheen, was stabbed more than a dozen times. Fortunately, she survived. Investigators determined the victims were, and to quote the sheriff's office at the time, targeted by the suspect due to them being Muslim and the ongoing Middle Eastern conflicts involving Hamas and the Israelis. His trial is now only due to start, and the family have also launched a civil suit. In November 2023, three 20-year-old Palestinian college students were shot in the US state of Vermont whilst wearing traditional Palestinian scarves. They were walking near the home of their grandmother and stated they believed the shooting was a hate crime. One of them, Hisham Awatani, was left paralyzed from the waist down. Now, these sorts of horrors are just memory hold. Where is the widespread denunciations of this is indicative of a very real danger, which is being whipped up and incited. Again, it's not there. Now, this anti-Palestinian racism often merges with broader anti-Muslim hatred. Indeed, it is today reported that Islamophobic assaults have surged by 73% in 2024 in Britain. In the US, anti-Muslim incidents rose by about 70% in the first half of 2024. US politicians and media outlets, meanwhile, have engaged in outright genocidal rhetoric against Palestinians. In November 2023, a Republican state lawmaker, Michelle Salzman, was asked, "We are at 10,000 dead Palestinians. How many will be enough?" And she replied, "All of them." In February 2024, the Tennessee Republican representative Andy Ogles was asked about the deaths of Palestinian children in Gaza and responded, "We should kill them all." In July 2024, the US Senator Lindsey Graham described the Palestinians in Gaza as the most radicalized population on earth. Trump's pick for US ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, once declared there's really no such thing as a Palestinian. And indeed, more broadly, we can see, for example, false claims about the beheading of Israeli babies on the 7th of October, which never happened, used to whip up general fear and hatred of Palestinians as a whole. Within Israeli society, anti-Arab hatred is completely mainstream. In 2016, long before 7th of October, nearly half of Israeli Jews reported they wanted to remove the entire Arab population of Israel. That is, the Palestinian citizens of Israel, as in its official borders, not the West Bank or Gaza. The mass ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian fifth of the Israeli population. In 2022, Israel Katz, now Israeli defense minister, warned Palestinian citizens of Israel that they would suffer another Nakba if they flew the Palestinian flag. The Nakba being the murderous ethnic cleansing of Palestinians in 1948. Israel's nation-state law, passed back in 2018, enshrines the idea that only Jewish citizens of Israel have the right to self-determination. A new poll finds that 72% of Jewish Israelis don't trust Palestinian citizens of Israel, who again make up a fifth of that population, with 45% saying they're not willing to have social friendships with Arabs. Nearly 3/4 support ethnically cleansing the entire population of Gaza, in line with Trump's genocidal proposition. 60% consistently oppose all humanitarian aid to Gaza, which would mean all Palestinians there dying. And I'm afraid to say, polling has suggested that the Israeli Jewish population is divided between those who think enough firepower has been used in Gaza and those who think not enough firepower has been used in Gaza. Now, Israel, of course, imposes apartheid, with the 3 million Palestinian citizens of the West Bank subjected to the longest occupation of modern times, depriving them of basic rights, imposing mass incarceration, either through kangaroo courts or without charge or trial at all, the theft of their land, ethnic cleansing, torture, shooting dead, killings of children, amongst other citizens. We could go on. Anti-Palestinian racism is simply the inevitable underpinning of Israeli settler colonialism. It's used to justify dispossessing and subjugating the Palestinian people. It's nothing specific to Israel and Palestine. This is what settler colonialism always does. And of course, Palestinians have been slaughtered by the Israeli state since the genocide began, using Western weapons and Western support in vast, vast numbers, mostly women and children. And that's become completely normalized. Well, it's been normalized from the start, as has the incessant genocidal rhetoric of Israeli leaders and officials, calling Palestinians, amongst other things, human animals who should suffer collective punishment because they have collective guilt. Now, our media outlets don't even bother to hide they don't regard Palestinian life as having equal worth or even a fraction of the worth of an Israeli life or a Western life. Anti-Palestinian hatred is embedded in Western media, in Western politics, and Western culture. It's not even acknowledged, let alone challenged. Instead, it's promoted by our elites. That's the context in which, driven by anti-Palestinian racism, anti-Palestinian hatred, Brafman shot 2 Israelis who themselves responded with the anti-Arab hatred. The New York Times preposterously headlines this as Florida man blames mental health crisis for shooting of Israeli tourists. How insulting. Hatred of Palestinians is not caused by mental illness. Racism is not caused by mental illness. In this case, that hatred is caused by a Western-facilitated colonial project, Israel's occupation, colonization, and genocide in Palestine. And here is just one manifestation, no matter how preposterous it may seem. Please like and subscribe, leave your thoughts, your comments, help us expand the operation at patreon.com/ownjoes84, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, all the rest. We're reaching whole new audiences, as well as the podcast, which is now properly up and running, so you can listen to this wherever you get your podcasts. The podcast is being, throughout the week, put up to date, and from the weekend will just go up as and when we record the videos. Share the video. I'll speak to you soon.